welcome back to this edition of the Blame Game. The opening round of playoffs was this weekend. It was Team Liquid slaughtering FlyQuest after a pretty bad game one, and a banger series between CLG and Cloud9. Now, normally I would cover those series, but it didn't really feel like either of them needed a blame game. I mean, do we really need to cover Philip, a rookie in his first split, kind of getting slammed by Blippo, one of the greatest Western top laners of all time? Do we need to talk about CLG, who almost won that series? It was super winnable. There were some mistakes like the Luger face check, but do I need to sit there and be like, yep, shouldn't have done that? No. So instead, we're gonna be talking about All Pro, baby. That's right. The other thing that happened this week, and there are a lot of criticisms around the votes. The two main complaints were, does the best team really have all the best players, with EG getting 4 of the 5 All Pro first team votes, as well as the players winning off name value going to mostly Core JJ, as well as Bjergsen criticism over players that might have deserved it as well, like Palafox and Afromu. There are definitely some kernels of truth that fans are identifying, but some of the reasoning is off the mark. There was the typical lambasting of media votes by finding a couple troll ballots, usually clearly by people who either didn't watch the league or are voting off nationality or something. And these are rightly called out by fans as ridiculous, and hopefully that causes the attention of Riot to not give these people votes in the future. The problem is that sometimes fans use these fringe examples as leverage to scapegoat the entire media votes, or sometimes for casters as a whole, for those problems that we were identifying earlier. However, for this year at least, all you need to do is open the ballots to see why the voting this year went the way that it did. Pros and coaches had more first and second team votes for Core JJ than any other of the groups that voted. They also would have, if taken in isolation, voted for 100% EG first team All Pro, with there only being a tie between Danny and Berserker, giving it to Impact over Someday, who won when you factored in all the other votes. At least this year, it's clear that pros and coaches are the cause of most of the issues that fans are having with the voting. I've talked before on Twitter and online on Hotline League and stuff about how every group that votes has their own kind of biases, and how it makes sense that the pros end up voting this way. A lot of people say that scrim games shouldn't count, and of course they shouldn't, but it's impossible to separate the hundreds of more games that you play in preparation against certain people than just the stage games. And so those are some biases that are naturally going to leak into pro and coach voting. This will also cause them to index more into the personal experience that they had against this player than looking about how that player performed against the entire field on stage. In that context, when EG is clearly the best team in the league, probably crushing scrims, it makes sense that it feels suffocating to play against them, and you naturally feel like they have the best players across the board. It's likely a similar case for teams with stacked talent that are underperforming on stage. A team like Team Liquid has dominated the early game even on the stage, and you can assume that scrims are going the same way. A game like what happened at the end of the regular season versus 100 Thieves, where they end up getting a 4K lead before throwing, in most scrims is probably just an FF at 15 when you fall that far behind that quickly. It feels like their players are amazing, even if they do drop some games on stage. This examination of the biases that they might have is starting to turn some public sentiment against coaches and pros on Reddit. Now, to defend them, they're also the only ones who know what it feels like to actually play against these players for the entire game with Fog of War on. Casters, fans, and media just basically follow what's shown on screen or what you can tell from the minimap, which means bouncing between lanes kind of randomly, not closely following trading patterns and wave manipulation, or even how that they're abusing the Fog of War to put pressure on the enemy team. Casters, media, and fans are also way more likely to turn to stats, for better or worse, whatever biases those are going to bring. Every voting group is biased by how we experience these games. So to recap, fans in the old day used to have more of a problem with media and caster votes for following narratives and just following name value. It's starting to turn more towards pro players now for not taking into account stage games and using scrims and personal experience. We tried doing fan votes before in EU, and that was a shit show where it was basically just a popularity contest. So there seems to be this unsolvable problem with the voting. But there's one more part to this equation that we need to consider: fan perception itself. Anyone who saw the post-game 1 thread from that FlyQuest and Team Liquid series knows what I'm talking about. And in some sense, I get it. fans do not like how necessarily the Team Liquid roster has been constructed, the way the money's been thrown at them, how they were hailed to be a super team. Then they start underperforming. A lot of the people in the community still believe that they're good. I understand where some of the dislike for this team comes from, but the problem is that personal dislike has infected the perception of how these players are actually playing on the Rift. Yeah, Core JJ is not the MVP candidate he once was. He's struggling and making more mistakes than we usually see out of him. Bjerg is not the 2014 MVP 1v9 dominant player that he once was. But they both have had pretty good splits, all things considered. They're still the third place team in the league, and it's not that unreasonable to think that the third place team has some of the best players when voting for top 3 positionally. All that while underperforming in results. The people who are being corrupted by narratives and name value probably aren't the pros or the media or the casters, though of course, like I just said, all of us have our biases, but realistically it's the fans more often than not. I've been accused of being against every team under the sun at some point, and when I look at where that's coming from, it's almost always by fans of that team. Moving from the name value and narrative conversation onto the best team has all the best players, that's actually one that I'm a lot more sympathetic to fans on, and no offense to anyone on EG, but I really doubt they have the best players in every position. If you broke that team apart and scattered those players across the wind to the other 9 teams in the LCS, realistically, how many of these players are making all-pro first split next year? In League of Legends, skill, performance, and team chemistry are all force multipliers. It's the reason that in the right environment, a good player becomes a great player, and in the wrong environment, a great player can become a bad one. Imagine a really strong laning, super aggro top laner who's always going to push his advantages as hard as he can, and you put him in a team with a strong mid laner as well, but who prefers roaming, and a jungler who's willing to support that playstyle, and maybe even throw in a roaming support as well. Suddenly, that guy who's creating some of his own leads are getting blown open with the help of his team. Then if you take that same player and put him in a team that's struggling with a weak mid laner who's going to be down pressure and a selfish bot lane who just wants to play for their own lane dominance as well, suddenly this guy might not look nearly as good. The exact same plays and mentality that allowed him to blow games open on the good team are suddenly now big problems that are getting punished. He might not have the same vision control he had before, and so when he pushes up, it's blind now, and either he's going to be pushing too hard and getting ganked, or he has to back off and can't push as hard and get the same CS leads as he could before. In League of Legends, the same exact play and mindset can sometimes be amazing or disastrous. This is what makes both roster construction in League of Legends very difficult, but also judging individual performance. And in some sense, it's a flawed idea to begin with. Perfectly evaluating individual strengths in a game as interconnected with your team as League of Legends is never going to work well. It's especially difficult if you're in the game playing against some of these teams. Take that dominant top laner hypothetically on the good team. If you're playing against that, how do you separate how much is the top laner crushing you versus his team supporting him? Realistically, you just feel like you're getting dove under turret and killed. That's not to say we should hand wave this entire problem away either, in that we should just accept when the first team all-pro is just the best team's roster. It's clearly not right to me that 4 out of the 5 spots in both LEC and LCS were taken by the #1 team in splits that were relatively closely contested. I'm just saying that I don't have the solution either, and I wish there was a solve. Anyways, that's gonna do it for this episode of The Blame Game. Thank you all so much for watching. Playoffs begins tomorrow, assuming this comes out Wednesday. Then we'll be having matches all 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We're gonna have some tight upper bracket battles. Team Liquid versus 100 Thieves is gonna be a banger, and we'll see the first couple teams actually knocked out of the World's Hunt. So I'll see you then.
You know what is going to be really effing expensive? Worlds. I'm going to try to go to Worlds. No updates yet. I can't tell you what I'm doing or where I'm going or what part. Anyway, it's going to be very, very expensive. And if you guys would like, if you are purchasing something from Alienware, you can actually help cover those costs directly, because for the first time ever, if you purchase through the link that is in the description, alienware.com/Travis, that a portion of that sale will go towards me. First time I've ever done this with Alienware. They offered it to me, and I'm really excited about the fact that we're actually doing this sort of direct cut thing where you just know a portion of what you purchase will come back to TGI so that I can afford to do things like spend, I don't know, forever in New York, which is a very expensive city. I don't know if you know that. Anyway, the whole point is, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the interview. Please hit up the link. Thank you to Alienware for our sponsorship, and we'll see you later.